everybody. We are beyond thrilled to have today's guest with us. They are the co-creator, writer, director, producer of the very important television series A League of Their Own. This is Will Graham. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh my gosh. Hi, guys. It's so nice to be here.
It is so amazing to have you here. We've been trying to get this for a while. We're so excited to talk to you.
Oh, it's a total pleasure. And yeah, I think some fans of your podcast reached out to me on Twitter and were like, "You should really do this." And I was like, "Great. I will follow your commands."
Listening to the fans. Now that's that's a good showrunner.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, we love our fans.
Yes, we do. I say as we now have some. Anyway, we've been talking to a crew of various TV shows and just basically introducing our audience to different jobs behind the scenes. Now, you have probably one of the biggest jobs. What does a co-creator and showrunner do?
Well, that's a really good question. It's different depending on the show. But I think, what being a showrunner means is that sort of the buck stops with you creatively when it comes to all the creative elements of the show, whether it's the scripts or the casting or hiring directors or ultimately kind of what gets delivered in the edits. And then also, very often that person, but not always, that person's also the person who created the show. So in the case of me and Abby with League, and also Desiree, who was really integrally involved in the entire process, it sort of meant seeing it through. It's the like insane job where you have to have the crazy creative vision, and then you have to solve like 1 million tiny problems on the way to actually making it. That like it's just insane the number of things that there are.
Yeah, it sounds like stuff. I mean, it seems like things would just pop up left and right that you have to kind of put out fires and all of
Yeah,
that.
I've always loved that combination. I think if I
Mhm.
just loved the sort of creative imagining part, like I'd be very tempted to write novels or something where you don't have to deal with the rest of the world. But I kind of love the intersection of, you have this crazy idea and then it's you and a couple people sitting alone in a room, and then suddenly you're on a baseball field and it starts raining halfway through the day and everyone is like, oh God, what are we doing with the rest of the day? What does this mean about the schedule? What if, the wardrobe is wet now? We have to, and it's, I guess that intersection of sort of having ideas that you really want to share with people, and then kind of pulling together this sort of incredible and very large group of talented people to make it happen.
It's amazing. I can't even imagine the hours spent just getting everything right. So, um,
Well, I don't know if you always get everything right. Sometimes like your idea of right changes or is even like bettered by something that happens that you didn't imagine, or an idea that an actor has, or something else that happens in the unfolding of the scene. So ultimately what you're seeing on screen is really the work of an enormous team.
Is there anything that was supposed to happen but changed for the better?
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, so many things. I think like the most obvious example for us is we had a lot of actors who are really skilled improvisers, and that starts with Abby, but it's also definitely true of Darcy and Bemisole Gumelo, who plays Clance, who's also a writer on the show, is like one of the funniest improvisers that I've ever worked with, and is also like British, so she's improvising in an American accent, which is insane. But then, like, the baseball sequences are another great example where we have these incredible real players that we're working with. Justine Siegel, who's our coordinator for baseball, was the first woman to ever coach on a major league staff, and her jersey's in Cooperstown. And, you know, um, the way that that unfolds and her perspective and the real players who are playing the baseball players, brings so much to it. But also, there's something incredibly fun, and I think this mostly comes through when I'm directing, where you're like, okay, something happened in the day. Suddenly, we have 2 hours to get this scene we were supposed to have 5 hours for. So, what's the like really beautiful idea that captures everything that I need to capture? That's maybe like a little simpler and more elegant than what I had in mind.
All right, let's just push forward here. So do you pitch the show and then give up the rights to a production company or network? Like, how does that work if they cancel a show?
Just like curious about like the background of this stuff, like not necessarily for a certain show, just I mean in general, since
we've been having a lot of like
little bit of experience, just a bit,
and
right?
we like did an episode about this kind of stuff from all the shows that got canceled in 2022.
Yeah. So it really depends on the show. But in the case of League, Sony has the rights to the movie. So they have the rights to the show. They're the studio. Amazon, which is the network, distributes it, right? So Sony retains the rights no matter what because they have what's called the underlying material, which in this case is the movie.
Got it. Speaking of the movie,
yeah,
what was the process for adapting it into a series and getting it up all over the place?
I think we love the movie and we grew up on the movie, and I think every person involved in the show has a slightly different relationship to it. For me, I sort of found it as like a little queer kid who wasn't surrounded by queer content and was playing a lot of Little League baseball, which my dad made me do. Is probably a little bit too strong of a way of saying it, but like strongly encouraged me to do. And I sort of felt undercover as like a boy on the team. And I was like, I didn't have any words to describe what I was feeling, but like, kind of felt like, oh no, I'm going to get found out. And there was something about the movie that kind of just gave you the feeling of like, oh, it's okay to be on the field, even if you don't look like or sound like or act like what people expect to find on the field. And then a few years ago, I started looking into the real history behind it, and sort of, I think, had the feeling that there was probably a really big and important chapter of queer history underneath it. And then the more I looked, the more you find, and the most obvious thing was the stories of African American women who weren't allowed to play in the league, but players like Connie Morgan, Toni Stone, Mamie Johnson, and there's dozens of others who maybe didn't get as far, who went on to play professionally in the Negro leagues. And even Penny Marshall, I think, has said publicly, and she certainly said to me and Abby, like, oh, that's a story that I really wish that I'd gotten to tell. And then beyond that, there were these stories of queer women who sort of had to make themselves look like something they weren't, or give up certain parts of themselves in order to get that opportunity. But at the same time, the way that Darcy Carden's character says in the pilot, like, they kind of got to rob the bank. They got these opportunities to make money and have a team and become a different version of themselves, and in some cases get independence from a lot of the structures that were sort of common for women at the time. And so it was incredible, just personally an incredible life experience, kind of growing into all of that research and getting to know a lot of the people involved. And pretty early on in the process, Abby and I already knew each other a little bit in New York, and I was kind of talking to her about what I was thinking about doing, and she got excited about it, and we started talking about it together, and it really came from the both of us from the start.
That's great. Our third host for Big Gay Energy grew up with A League of Their Own and loved it, and she was telling us about this show before so early on. She was so excited. She couldn't be here today, but I just want you to know how much this show has meant to her as well.
Oh,
Because, I mean, obviously it's touched so many people, but to see her get so excited about this show, it it made it even better for us. So
what do you
thank you
think got
for.
her excited about it?
Okay, anyway, I think that she and I both grew up playing sports and being queer and playing sports.
Yeah.
Um and I know that she and I had a lot of similar experiences where we felt like we had to kind of be undercover in some ways, especially me, considering where I'm from. But uh, I know that it meant a lot to her just to see something from that meant so much to her as growing up as a kid, somewhere that she could go and just see this warm, kind of welcoming, special movie, and then see something that was even more representative on TV at a time when we were feeling like, daggum, all of our shows are getting canceled. What's going on? And then the show comes along that just shows, so many aspects of what we were looking for that I think she just couldn't um couldn't be more excited about it. I think it's
Oh,
really taken a place as as one of her favorites.
well, thank you, and thank her for that. And I think that's a lot of what, I think again, Abby would have a slightly different perspective, and so would Desta, and that's sort of the soul of the show in a lot of ways. For me, I think what's been incredible about it is something really similar, which is sort of putting yourself back in the story and finding yourself in stories that feel familiar. And League of Their Own is a movie that we sort of think of as like a classic with a lot of Americana in it, right? Which it really is. And then the fact that that story really, in reality, centers queer women and queer people and queer people of color, um, is it makes you think about yourself a little differently, and the idea that we don't live in a world that's perfect for us now. I mean, that's an understatement on so many levels, but I think it's an act of heroism as queer people to find joy in that world and to make lives that are full of meaning and fall in love with the people that you want to fall in love with. And just the idea that, our history, while there's a lot of tragedy in it, isn't only tragic, and that people have always been fighting that fight and found a way to have really joyful lives despite the adversity. Yeah, to me, that, personally has really meant a lot.
That whole thing could just be a quote that you just
Very
said.
long quote.
I would stick around for the end of that quote. Thank you.
Technically, anything you say is a quote, Bree.
That is true. I could
Right.
say anything.
No, like that pretty much summed up everything that I felt and I feel like in an even better way than I could think it. So yeah, absolutely. But speaking of it being awesome, since its release, League of Their Own has been recognized by the Human Rights Campaign. Several cast and crew members have been nominated for awards. What do you think sets A League of Their Own apart from other queer shows?
Boy, I don't know. I mean, first of all, I I I like celebrate the queer narratives in the show. And then also, this is a show that hopefully speaks to all kinds of people, and people can find themselves in the same way. Camille Ninjani said it really well, where he was like, I've been, as ever since I was a kid, watching stories that center straight white men and not even thinking about it, just sort of putting myself in the story. So I think in a lot of ways, this show, there's parts of it that are a love letter to queer people. There's also parts of it that are an invitation to non-queer people to just step into our shoes and our world and enjoy this story that really is universal. I think in terms of what makes the show stand out, I guess I would say I think we're more standing on the shoulders of other queer shows, and trying to build on some of what they've done, but also really standing on the shoulders of the real stories, and the real women who had those experiences and uh, played ball and everything else. For me, the thing that makes it different or special, just from shows in general, is that sense of joy underneath it, and even the really hard parts. For this is a spoiler for anyone who hasn't watched the show, but the bar raid, things like that, which came from real stories of people that we are friends with, and talk to, um, that it's told through a lens that at the end of the day it's worth it to still live as yourself and play the sport that you love, but not give up the parts of yourself that society doesn't necessarily support. So I would say it's like the joy, to me, that really is the thing that I love the most in the show. Sort of joy without looking away from the hard things.
I lost my train of thought. I am so sorry.
That's okay. Happens to me constantly.
It's
You
the
talk so
ADHD
well.
in us.
I remember now. So not only like A League of Their Own doesn't just allow you to like see yourself, because of so many diverse storylines, I feel like it allows people to learn more about others and how different experiences can be, especially when you compare um, Carson and Max, because like two different, both want the same goal, but
It's an interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I think that's just incredible.
Yeah, it's we talked about the sort of pilot, which is the inciting incident for the show, sort of being a moment where a door opens for one person and it doesn't open for another person, just based on their race and the social construct around that, and what that meant at the time. And that's very much based on real events. The scene where Max and Clance go to try out for the league, in the pilot, is very close to what happened to Mamie Johnson and her friend Rita when she tried to try out for the league. And Mamie, looking back on her, that sort of chapter in her story, was like, well, when I played pro ball, I didn't have to wear a skirt. And there was something kind of badass in that, knowing that we didn't want to minimize the effect of that, but we also wanted um, to position that scene and that event as not defining for Max. And she's going to find her own door and her own world, even if she has to make it herself. Which I think, it was heavily influenced by Mamie, Connie, and Tony's story, heavily influenced by a lot of our writers. And ultimately, Max's story is about, the show's about teams, different kinds of teams, right? There's a team that you play with on the field. There's also a team that kind of gets you to the field, right? A family or a chosen family, friends. And so Max's story, I think we took as an opportunity to sort of explore both sides of that. But it is something that I think it was one of the biggest sort of structural, I guess, risks in the show. Like, there hasn't really been a show that is structured in exactly that way before, with these sort of parallel stories that intersect, and these kind of side by side worlds. And it was an incredible challenge and an incredible privilege.
You completely nailed it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I think the experience of making something, and I'm guessing you guys and a lot of your audience are probably creative people too. So the feeling of when you've made something, and I see like every tattered edge and I'm like, oh, that happened because of that, and oh, that moment, and I don't know if we got that right, but it's wonderful, when other people don't see that, and when they bring themselves to the show and make it mean something to them. Like, that's something that ultimately doesn't come from us. It's like we build a house and we let people into it, and people decide whether they want to live in the house. And it's just been incredible watching how much the audience and the fans of the show have sort of let the show into their lives. I've never had an experience like that before.
Well, I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm sitting on the couch eating some chips, so I'm gonna be here for a while in the house.
I'm really glad. Feel free to tell us how the house is working for you.
It's like it's wonderful. It's cozy.
Oh,
We'll put it that way.
I'm so glad. Yeah, it's such a strange feeling, when you think it was really 4 years, 4.5, 4 years, something like that, of living with these histories and exploring the ideas and working with Abby and working with other writers and everything. And then there's sort of one day where you're like, okay, here it is. And
And
this
then you're
big
like,
thing, that's been inside your head for so long is suddenly like it belongs to other people, and it's really wonderful, that experience.
It's insane how long like these shows take to get developed and actually put out there, and I don't think anybody realizes that. So it was like 4.5 years, you said.
Yeah, and in fairness, they don't all take that long. This one went through a bunch of twists and turns and different chapters along the way, and it still is going through different twists and turns and chapters. It was never going to be easy, because of the movie, because of the stories, because of the complexity of what we're trying to do. So I've gotten to a place where, to like quote the Tom Hanks line from the movie, like I just embrace the hard, and like the hard is what makes it great. And that's been, a part of the journey the whole way along. But also, I wouldn't change it. Meaning, um, the great thing about that development process was that by the time we finally showed up on set, we really knew what we wanted to do.
It's great. You talked about talking to the actual people and hearing their stories. Why is it so important to accurately tell their stories of just queer people and people of color in general from the 1940s?
Um, that's a great question. I think, on the one hand, just like for me personally, I would say those people, and Maybelle Blair is obviously someone who's talked publicly and came out around our premiere at the age of 95, but there's lots of others too. They've really come to mean something to me and to all of us. So you want them to see themselves in the show. And at the same time, and I think this happens with a lot of shows that represent a historically marginalized group, there's the additional pressure of, we don't get a lot of shots. TV does. We don't have 27 different lesbian cop shows on TV, or
I wish.
That's paradise. Don't
for someday, you guys.
don't threaten me with a good time, Will.
That is so funny. So I think, what happens in the writers' room in the making process is when people from those groups are involved, you feel the dual pressures of wanting to really represent your experience and be authentic, and then knowing that, like, you're incredibly lucky to get to do it at all, and you really want to make something out of that opportunity. And I would say, like, telling these stories now, when I grew up, which I graduated from college in 2003, like, there was like nothing about queer people in the like sex ed book. There was no like history unit that focused on queer history. Obviously, like, people of color, Black people, especially Black women, like large parts of that history, including a lot of what happened in the factories in World War II, have either been lost or edited out or deemed to not be as important. So getting to tell some of those stories in a way that people can see themselves in it, and it's joyful and fun and a comedy, and at the same time it's maybe giving them a story that they didn't have before. I think that's part of what we felt like we were getting to do with the show.
You're actually keeping their stories alive and making sure people don't forget them.
Yeah, I mean that is the hope, and I love, you guys probably know this, but like I love the history and the real anecdotes that we find along the way. And it's been so fun even on social media just to watch people like, oh, start to like order some of those books and learn a little more about the history underneath it. You don't have to know any of that to enjoy the show. The show is basically like a good time in a lot of
It
ways.
is. It definitely is. It's such a great show.
It's just the most of the spirit of it is pretty fun. I think the sort of what I think is important about the show hopefully speaks with a little bit of a quieter voice, where it's not saying like, this is important, you should care about this, but it's just bringing you into that world.
It's very interesting because you do get like this is important, not like directly, but especially with there being so much comedy, the balance for you to be able to do that was just insane. And also it being a comedy in itself is amazing because we don't have enough comedies.
Yeah,
There's like,
I mean, totally. We don't, and that's something that's so amazing about the movie, which is in some ways I think where the tone of the show sort of, it's not that it's the same, but it definitely grew from there, right? The movie it's set in the middle of World War II, historically a dark time, not often the place for the funniest comedies, and it's also just wow, what was that?
no idea.
I don't
Sounds like there's like a tiger on the call.
know. Yeah.
Uh so yeah, the movie set in World War II, and it has, wait, is that Sophie?
Yeah, I think
so.
for some reason her mic once it turned, it says microphone's off, but it's, I don't know if it's off.
Okay, interesting.
Oh my god, it
Oh
sounds
my
like an
god,
alien.
it's so crazy.
I feel like I'm in a tunnel.
Sophie, you can go ahead and X out if you want to, and I think I get you here, but I think I can handle it. I don't think these guys are gonna jump on me with any gotcha questions.
No.
So season 2, you have to tell us right now.
Yeah.
No.
No, we would never.
We're not those people.
Okay, you guys were asking about the sort of balance of the comedy and drama, and
Yeah.
The movie has that. You can sort of imagine the like Oscar bait version of the movie that's a little more like capital I important, and instead like Penny told the story in this beautifully human, really funny way with these iconic and really flawed characters, and I think that's part of what has made the movie so long lasting, is that sort of comedic approach. But I also definitely feel like, and again, Abby or Dester, any of the other writers may put it differently, I feel like I discover emotion in comedy, and I discover comedy in some of my most emotional moments. And it was really something that in developing the show, Abby and I looked at each other and we were like, well, we don't want to, sometimes I think when you have a show that has a balance of both, you wind up being in the middle. It's like the comedy's not going to be too absurd and the emotional stakes won't be too heavy. We were kind of like, we're instead just going to really go for it on both sides.
Oh, you did.
And see what happens,
No, A plus.
But it was also a place, just to say it, that you don't always in television now get to make a pilot for the show. And the fact that we got to make a pilot and we got to see the tone, and we were like, oh, okay. And we could kind of adjust it a few degrees and go from there. I think that gave us the confidence to really go for it.
So you did start out with a pilot, not like a full season order?
No. Yeah, we started with the pilot. We actually wrote in terms of what those 4 years were, we originally conceived the show as a half hour. We wrote a season of the half hour show. And then I think Amazon was like, well, we're never going to be able to afford this show as a half hour. It should be an hour. And we were like, okay, great. Maybe you could have told us that beforehand. And then we made a pilot for the hour version and then wrote the hour version. So that's what I mean, where it's like we really got to live with the characters and refine them in a couple different formats. And a couple different sort of drafts in a way that you don't always get to do on TV. But also, it's fun for fans of the show to know that there's another version of season 1 out there somewhere saved on people's computers.
Ooh, don't invite hackers.
Yeah, you're right. I shouldn't invite hackers.
Don't be trying to get that.
Why is an hour cheaper than a half hour? That was my question.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, the economics of hour-long television are different, partly because you can syndicate them more, and partly because hours are basically where sort of the big shows tend to go. Not all the time, but so hours in general just are sort of made at a higher cost per minute, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
Than half hours usually, but the real answer is like, I'm not sure. That's just what happened.
We just got more, and I'm not complaining.
Yeah, don't complain, Kaitlynn.
I wasn't complaining. I was curious. There's a huge difference.
Yes.
Okay, Haley.
There is a huge
difference. So I have a question. When you guys cast Rosie O'Donnell, that was such a freaking wonderful homage to the movie. And was that something that you guys like wanted to do from the beginning? And is there a possibility for more cameos?
There's certainly,
if there are future seasons,
there certainly is a possibility for more cameos. And the way that the Rosie thing came about was really wonderful. I mean, I think we originally sort of set out saying, well, maybe we'll do kind of more direct links with the movie at some point, but at first we really want the show to stand on its own. So we were sort of developing the arc of the season, and Abby knew Rosie. I can't completely remember how, but they'd gotten to know each other. And Abby was like, I was thinking maybe I would ask her to come to the writer's room and talk to the writers. And we were excited and nervous and all the things, because I think at that point, really, no one really knew what we were doing. And we came in and we sort of, Rosie came in and we pitched sort of the rough season, and she was like, I like it, here's what I think. And then she was like, and something that I could do is like, in this gay bar, maybe there's a person like this, and she sort of pitched us a little bit like what she wanted to do. And we were like, yeah, that sounds great. So like every other part of the show, that was a real collaboration. And it was such a joy. She was in the episode that I wrote and directed, and was just like in that episode, there was a lot of moments where I really like pinched myself about what we were getting to do. And that was definitely one of them.
I can imagine.
And if you couldn't hear Bree because of her mic, she said, I can imagine.
Yeah. Totally.
Sue me. All right.
We'll see. So the next question is from Theora, and I want to make sure to read it word for word because she wrote this out.
Okay.
So one of the most incredible episodes in the series, I believe it's 6, which is an episode you directed, There seems to be a lot of subtle references to the Wizard of Oz throughout the entire episode. Carson is asked if she is a friend of Dorothy. Both Carson and Max cross through curtains when entering queer spaces. The golden lighting in Bert's house is like the yellow brick road. Were these choices comparing Dorothy entering Oz to the characters entering a whole new world?
Yes. I mean, first of all, thank you for that question. You clearly have watched that episode very closely, which is great. It was
She
really
had to just take a moment after that episode. Like, we had to
She
have a
did.
phone
It
call because
took her a while.
yeah.
oh, well that's amazing. Again, that she sort of let it mean something to her. And yeah, I mean, obviously Wizard of Oz is a huge reference and sort of part of queer storytelling, or there's a lot of queer inferences into the Wizard of Oz. And then it has the historical reference of like Friends of Dorothy, which like nobody exactly knows if that really came from the Wizard of Oz, but it seems like it must have somehow. And we early on in the writers' room talked about using a movie as a parallel, and sort of framing one episode with a movie. And The Wizard of Oz jumped out to me for all the reasons that we're talking about, right? And the idea that like the answer's inside you all along, as Dorothy says in The Wizard of Oz, and that you sort of have to travel someplace completely new in order to find yourself. Um, I think were the kind of the touchstone thematic pieces that obviously really resonate with what Carson and Max are both going through in the episode in their own specific ways. I'm really glad she noticed the curtains. I spent a lot of time explaining how why the curtains were important. But at the same time, in basing the episode on The Wizard of Oz, we sort of wanted to both celebrate that as a text and a set of references for the time, but then also interrogate it in a way, because obviously um, The Wizard of Oz is like, is sort of well, I guess you just say the cast is entirely white, and Clance in the show sees it really differently than Carson does or Vi does, right? So, and that really came from Bemi Sola Camelo, who plays Clance, who also sort of wrote or sort of spontaneously generated Clance's big speech about Dorothy in the writers' room. And so we wanted to really play the two sides of that reference and celebrate it and question it at the same time, which I think is very much in keeping with the spirit of the show in general.
Well, that's
Definitely
a
is.
different color.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love how, I mean, again, it's Bemi who came up with it. So in case it sounds like I'm celebrating a line that I wrote, but she's like, she is not even paying them. Like, he is just making them go on a magical adventure, like and it
I love
it kind of equates to her journey in the factory and the extra hours she's having to work supposedly because she's volunteering for the war. And is Dorothy like a nice person trying to find her way home, or is she like a horrible dictator? Is sort of like the question behind it.
I love Clance so much. That's like
Me too.
one of the characters that I relate to so much because I will go on those rants about media, and I absolutely adore Clance's obsession with comic books.
I really do too. And I'll say there's not a lot of things in the show that like the show has a lot of layers in the sense of like, the writer would do a pass at something, and then I would do a pass, and then Abby would do a pass, and then we would do punch ups. So at the end of the day, you're like, whose idea was this? Or what did I write in here? I can't really remember. But I put Clance's the story in the pilot about how Clance writes a letter to Wonder Woman, sort of like ranting at them for what they're doing to her character, and instead they publish like a 4-sentence version of the letter that's just like, great job. Happened to me when I was a kid. I wrote like a very long critical essay to and sent it to X-Men, and then they like
Oh,
my name and just printed like a 4-sentence thing that was like, hey, I really love the issue. And so that was, it was a little thing that I put into the character, that I'm not as brave or smart or many other things as Clance is, but it helped me relate to her at the start, I think.
I love it
Oh
so
my gosh.
much.
It's
That's
awful that
so
things like that happen.
yeah. But
Yeah.
what was your beef with X-Men?
Honestly, I can't really remember my specific beef, but what I do remember feeling as an adult, you look back and you're like, yeah, I wrote them probably like a 3-page treatise, and their letters page is like 1 page long. And, they're just probably very nice 20 somethings who are trying to do their job. But like what I really felt at that moment in my life was just this real sense of like, how is this okay? That I think is like, I don't know, the intensity that people feel about stories, and the
Yep.
idea that Clance, can't exactly figure out how to find herself in this world, so she's figuring out that through living in this imaginary world in her head. It's very much how I felt as like a young queer person, where it's like, hey, not really sure how to do any of this.
Mm-hmm.
Guess I'm gonna go in here for a while, in comic books and the X-Files
That
and
was me
whatever
and
else.
Buffy.
Oh yeah, I mean Buffy's incredible. uh,
Absolutely.
and it's what I think about when I make things now too, is like, you're making that experience for people. So it's like, I always kind of ask myself the question, like, where are you taking people that's like a fun journey or an adventure, and then what are you kind of giving them to take back with them, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, yeah. That's it's like one of my favorite things about media in general. But um speaking of like seeing yourself, we recently spoke to Lee Robinson about how impactful Uncle Bert was with Max's exploration of gender expression. How was that whole narrative developed?
It's a great question. um, so the real truth is, it's a really good example. Sorry, it's a really good
No.
example of kind of what I was saying before, where like people's perspectives and ideas get piled on top of each other. And basically, this is a long-winded way of me saying I can't exactly remember how Uncle Bert first entered the narrative, but one of our writers who's wonderful, Enfiniso Dofia, who also wrote on Pachinko and is a playwright, um, when we were first meeting with her, she talked about how she had done a lot of work in her own plays on genealogy and sort of family experiences and how they're passed down. And we knew enough about Max at that point to know that Tony and Edgar, her parents, were going to be a really big part of her story. And I think something in that conversation made us feel like, okay, let's spend a minute and really imagine the bigger world that Max comes from, and what the story of her family has been as part of the Great Migration, coming up from the South, and how long they've been there. And Edgar's lived in town longer than Tony, and in doing that, I think we started to talk about how you first find queerness. And we knew that for Carson, she was going to start to find it on this team. And we also knew that in Max's story, the sort of role of the team, especially in the sort of first chunk of the season, is taken by her family, that sort of team that gets you to the field. So we started to talk about like, what are those mirrors that you start to find in your own family, that at first maybe you think, oh, that person's exactly like me. And um and in reality, of course they're not, because no one's ever a perfect mirror of your experience or your own journey with gender or anything else, but we wanted to develop a really positive relationship for Max in that sense. And I think we then started to research trans stories from the time. And there are incredible stories there about the factories, about people passing, and again, just that reminder that people have always sort of experienced gender really differently, and trans people have always existed, and non-binary people have always existed, and yeah, our society and our vocabulary is maybe starting to catch up to that, which is wonderful. But none of this is new on any level. And then Lee really brought. I mean, it's really hard to overstate. We had trans and sort of gender nonconforming writers who worked on the story and helped shape it. But Lee really brought, and Patrice, who plays Gracie, just brought a beautiful depth and soul and seriousness and warmth and humor to that role. And they also brought this, something that we really worked on in the writer's room, but they brought to life in a way that I think was ultimately more powerful than powerful for us than we even thought, which is like the sense that they have a really wonderful life, despite all the sacrifices and the things that they give up to have it. And Desta talks about like how maybe her favorite moment in the show is like where Max wakes up kind of hungover after the party, and Birdie and Gracie are kind of just making fun of her, and then have this nice kind of couple moment where they kiss. And that was something that really came from Lee and Patrice. And it's like I said before, it's all a collaboration where you have ideas and then the actors just bring something that ultimately is better. So we were so lucky to have them in those roles.
They're amazing.
Yeah, they really are.
In the first episode of the show, Greta and Carson write a letter to Charlie.
Yeah.
Was that scene Greta and Carson writing the letter, or Abby and Darcy goofing around after a few martinis?
Oh, the letter writing scene was, it was definitely Greta and Carson writing the letter. But Abby and Darcy, who play Greta and Carson, have known each other for many years. And I think the feeling of how to like get each other and how to like poke at each other and everything really that comes through in their performances, and it definitely came through in that scene. That scene was shot at the end of a day on the pilot, and we didn't have as much time as we wanted to, which always happens. And so it was definitely a situation where Jamie Babbitt, who directed the pilot and the next two episodes, kind of set up the cameras, and it was just like, okay, like do it. And she was yelling out ideas, and they were doing things, and it was great. And I think that sort of sense of fun and immediacy comes through in the scene.
Yeah, it reminded me. First of all, it was perfect, and it also reminded me of things that I've done with my friends or people that I've just met. Even when you get into the situation like that where you're thrown together,
Yeah.
was.
Yeah, well, it's also, it's a moment for Carson where she looks at Greta and she's like, this person is courageous and strong in a way that I don't know how to be, but I know that I kind of need to be, which I think is part of why she latches onto her at that moment, not knowing that there's a lot of pain and a backstory and a reason why Greta is that way.
Yeah, makes sense. Switching gears a little bit.
Sure.
You have another Amazon Prime show premiering on March 3rd called Daisy Jones and the Six.
That is correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
That show, like League, has been a long time in coming. It was delayed for COVID. It's based on a book by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which is wonderful and romantic and sort of takes you behind the scenes of one of the greatest albums of all time and a band that came together recorded this album, generated a lot of rumors, and then broke up, and nobody knows why. Um, and for me, the fun of that show, one of the fun parts of that show, was getting to kind of go on the bus with the band and really be on that journey and on that rise with them. But also, Scott Newstetter, who I ran the show with, and I think in different ways are both sort of obsessed with the music of that time, and getting to really make an album that speaks to those albums that we love with an incredible group of musicians has been so much fun. So the show comes out on March 3rd. We're incredibly excited for people to see it, and nervous, all the other things.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be great. All your work is amazing. And I don't just say that because we're talking to you. I mean, we really do. We
suck at lying about stuff like that, I promise.
That's good to know.
But that's a mini-series, correct?
Yeah, it's a 10-episode mini-series.
So, that's it.
Well, I mean, never say never. We'll see how the show does, and if people sort of move into the house and make something out of it like they have with League. Maybe there's a way to continue it, but at the moment we're not thinking about anything besides just putting the show out.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you think miniseries are better than shows at this point, because renewals are so hard to get anymore.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a part of me that, looking at the way that people are using data and metrics, and especially when you're telling a story with female protagonists, people from historically marginalized groups, there's something wonderful about just getting to end a story and then not go through that process. But at the same time, there's something amazing about living with characters for 3 seasons and essentially having them be part of your family. And ultimately, I think they're both satisfying to do in different ways.
So we hear you have another series in the works called Nigerian Princess.
That is right. I mean, that's a series that I'm producing that Ziwe Fumido, who you guys probably know, created and is starring in. And it's been so fun to get to help her sort of make her world and figure out a version of her scripted sensibility. I really can't wait for people to see it.
Does it have a release date yet? Or is it still
No, we haven't. We just turned in the 2nd episode, and hopefully we'll be able to start shooting it sometime this year. So I'll keep you guys posted.
Do you have any advice for people trying to break into the industry and how to tell underrepresented stories?
Well, first of all, for people trying to break into the industry, I think the thing that I would say is start to really cultivate your own process. The industry parts of it are always going to be hard, whether it's getting a show made, getting it renewed, getting representation, getting somebody to read your pilot, and so I think what you really have to do is figure out what your work means in your life and figure out a routine that really supports it. And then you have to be doing that work every day or whatever your schedule is, sort of no matter what's going on in your life and what's happening in the world and what the industry thinks of what you're doing. You have to sort of nurture your own process as an artist first. And then I think in terms of people who are trying to break in, really putting yourself into your scripts. When we're reading scripts for staffing, you read a lot of scripts that you're like, you know what, that's pretty good. And that totally feels like a TV show. And then you read one that you're like, oh, this is really weird and specific. And I don't, this voice feels different. And it's somebody just going a little bit deeper and writing from their own personal experience, or, something that they want to write about. So that difference is really big, you know. And again, I think that's part of kind of a good process. In terms of telling queer stories or underrepresented stories, I think there's not a magic answer to that. It is challenging because audiences of color and queer audiences, as we said earlier, tend to watch shows with white straight protagonists, and the same is not true in reverse, which creates a set of dynamics in data and ratings and everything else that essentially, I think, platforms a lot of the bias that exists in the world into those metrics, unless they're looked at thoughtfully with a lot of context. And the thing that I would say is, like, first of all, like, do it. It's incredibly important. The second thing I would say is, like, have a community. Find the people that you want to work with or that you want to have drinks with, who care about the same things that you care about, and find a team, and ultimately that's the thing that I think really makes it possible.
That's true. Not that I know from firsthand experience, but...
Well, not that, but you know about finding a team, because we all found each other, and it was awesome.
We had a good little team.
I'm sure it's the same thing for you guys with the podcast, right? It's like you do it partly because there's some joy in doing it together.
Oh, that's absolutely. We wouldn't be here. And so there's because there's two main reasons. One is, putting out, like, getting queer media, like, information about queer media out there, and then also our family. So, and those things go hand in hand. So
that's awesome. And I'm glad you guys are doing it.
And thank you for doing what you're doing, because it makes our jobs a lot more fun.
Yeah. We're getting close to talking about A League of Their Own.
We have to get the Warrior Nun first.
We're getting there.
Well, we appreciate it.
And then hopefully season 2 will do even more.
Yeah. No, we would love that.
Crossing fingers.
Yeah.
I'm sure we could figure out hundreds of more questions to ask you, because, like, we didn't even touch the surface on A League of Their Own. There's just so much in it. So much. I can't, like, there's no words. It's an experience. That's all I can say the show is. It really is.
Well, that is the nicest thing you could possibly say about it. And it means a lot to me that you guys say that, and that the fandom around the show, the different fandoms around the show, have really embraced it in that way. That's why we do what we do, and it really matters.
Absolutely. I love that.
Well, that wraps up our questions for today. Before we sign off, do you have any final words for the listeners at home?
I would just say, I assume there's a lot of queer people in your audience.
It's usually our base audience.
Yeah, I figured.
Just a bit.
Just a couple.
Yeah. So I guess I would just say, the same way as the characters in the show, by sorting out your lives and finding your people and falling in love, like, there is real heroism in that, in a world that isn't necessarily set up for you. And we need each other to make it worth it and to make it fun and everything. So, it's not the easiest time in the world to be a queer person. Not the easiest time in our country to be a queer person. So take care of yourselves and take care of each other.
That's beautiful. Thank you again for taking the time to talk with us today. We really appreciate it and loved getting to know you better.
Oh, thanks a lot.
And don't worry, I'm going to get you that list of books.
Okay,
I hit a snag, but I'm going to get it.
I can't wait.
To everyone at home listening, make sure to check out A League of Their Own and Daisy Jones and the Six, both streaming on Amazon. Well, the latter will be starting March 3rd.
Yes.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
And with that, we've been Big Gay Energy. If you like this episode, check out all our other episodes right here on YouTube. Please like, leave a comment below, and subscribe for more amazing, super gay content.
If you'd like to support us, check out our merch store, or join our Patreon for early access to episodes, exclusive content, and so much more.
Until next time, stay safe and hydrate for lesbian Jesus.